Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman. It's my pleasure to welcome our guest today, Sam Federman, a writer for Mid-Major Madness and host of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. Wanted to have him talk some Rutgers basketball. Sam, thanks so much for being here.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
And obviously, as things are in bloom now with allergies in the spring, transfer portal taking shape, and Rutgers has obviously added 3 mid-major players. Wanted to ask you specifically first about Jordan Derkack, the reigning Northeast Conference Player of the Year for Merrimack and Defensive Player of the Year as well.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Derkack was the best player in the NEC all year, and he really did a good job carrying that load offensively. And Merrimack is obviously known for their defense with their zone, and Derkack was a really good fit in that. And I don't really think you can glean all that much on how he's going to guard in man in Rutgers system from the zone, but you know that he's going to be out there, he's going to be aggressive, and he's going to be disruptive just the same way that he was in the Merrimack zone. But I think on the offensive side of the ball, he's really good at using his pacing and using his abilities to get to the basket and draw fouls. He was top 30 in the country in fouls drawn per 40 minutes. He led the NEC in fouls drawn per 40 minutes. He was second in the conference in free throw rate. This is not a guy that's an outside shooter. His game is all predicated on getting downhill, getting to the basket, and he's really good at that. Now, there's this clear step up in athleticism that he'll be facing when you go from the NEC to the Big Ten. It's partially part of the reason why last year's NEC co-players of the year, Josh Cohen and Jordan Minor, didn't go to the Big Ten and play big minutes immediately. Josh Cohen was a superstar for UMass in the A-10, and Jordan Minor played role player minutes at Virginia, but both of them were pretty effective. And I think Derkack can be really effective in a certain role. I don't think he's going to be relied on quite as much as he was at Merrimack because there's so many other ball handlers now on this team. At Merrimack, it was really Bud Clark, the freshman point guard, Derkack, and a little bit of Devin Savage. But now you have Dylan Harper, you have an Ace Bailey, Jeremiah Williams, Tyson Acuff, plenty of other ball handlers that can take the stress off of Derkack, who I think is going to be used as kind of like a spark plug type guy, maybe even coming off the bench to provide some points when they need it and some aggressive and disruptive defense.
Great points. And one thing that kind of impressed me by his numbers was for such a high usage player in terms of taking almost, a quarter of his team's shots. He still had an extremely high assist rate, top 115 in the country. Was curious your thoughts just in terms of that part of his game, how his awareness and kind of court IQ is in terms of being able to penetrate and creating scoring opportunities for his teammates.
Yeah, and the whole thing about Merrimack last year was they had 2 of the best players in the conference that were handling the ball on the vast majority of the possessions, and Bud Clark and Derkack. And those 2 guys had really good court vision. And Clark, obviously, as a point guard, you expect that. Derkack as a 6'5" wing, maybe you don't expect that as much. But he really did show the ability to find cutters at a high level and kind of create something when a play broke down for him or when he was trapped. Although I do think that he got a little reckless sometimes and he did turn the ball over a lot.
Yeah, that's the one thing that jumps out to me. I know some Rutgers fans are concerned by his shooting percentages, but for me, it was the high turnover rate. Obviously, had the ball in his hands quite a bit. But I think a big part of what he's going to need to do now is, get stronger and be a little bit more disciplined with the ball. Do you think having him in a different role, obviously it's impossible to how stars on low to mid-major teams are going to necessarily translate at the high major level. You mentioned a couple, but in terms of I guess the strengths of his game, do you think that bodes well for him being able to find an effective role for Rutgers?
Oh, I think he'll absolutely be able to find an effective role because, I think Steve Pikiell is a great coach, and I think there's enough talent on this roster to the point where maybe even if he doesn't translate all that well to the Big Ten, he can still give you good minutes off the bench. And I was surprised when his list of 4 teams came out and it was all high majors. Given where Josh Cohen, the previous NEC player of the year last year, transferred, and how Jordan Miner was a role player at Virginia, I kind of presumed that since the NEC was the worst conference in the sport, that he wasn't going to move all the way up to the high major level on a sure level. I thought there would be more A10 involved. I thought there would be more of that type of level involved, but good for him for getting the attention of the high majors. And I think that there's a reason why Steve Pikiell is bringing him in. He'll have a plan that will have Derkack affect the game in multiple ways, regardless of whether he's able to be as dominant on the ball as he was at Merrimack. I think he can be a good slasher, a cutter for Rutgers in certain situations, and at other times they can use him to control some of the offense.
Yeah, and I think Rutgers is going to want to run in transition. They're going to want to space the floor, and his size profile certainly fits. How they're building the roster, just loaded with 6'4", 6'5" guards and wings that they can just defend multiple positions and really kind of slide guys in seamlessly. I think he's going to play a lot of guys, especially initially. Any last thoughts just in terms of also having 2 years left of eligibility and being a Jersey guy? Do you think that, Derkack is the type of guy that, will want to stick around? Obviously, it's hard to predict in the NIL and transfer portal era, but do you think that that was part of the, plus in adding a guy like Derkack?
Oh, certainly. And especially given the fact that, hey, you look at Josh Cohen and now year 2 removed from being NEC Player of the Year, he's going to USC to play for Eric Musselman. So I think that there's definitely a big time role for Derkack in 2026 that he's looking at Rutgers. And I think he burst onto the scene as a freshman in 2023 on that stacked Merrimack team with Javon Bennett, Ziggy Reed, and Jordan Miner. Miner, obviously, NEC Player of the Year as well. And Javon Bennett was a starter for the Dayton team this year. Ziggy Reed ended up at Youngstown State. They were really damn good, and they were really damn good again. I mean, when you're coached by a guy like Joey Gallo, you know how to really guard. You know how to play the fundamentals of basketball. He's not going to trust you if you're not playing at a high level because he's a really good coach. And a lot of what Merrimack did on the offensive end was a lot quicker than what they did on the defensive end. They would really pressure you into holding the ball for a long time and turning it over on defense. But on offense, they kind of ran a little bit. And Derkack's actually his highest usage possessions were transition. And a Rutgers team that is going to want to slow you down on the defensive end and kind of play a little bit mirroring what Merrimack did. Not obviously not with the zone, but obviously still have a defensive identity, but exploit now having more offensive talent than it's ever had under Steve Pikiell. And they're going to want to run in transition. They're going to want to go to the pick and roll, presumably if they get a center. They'll go to the pick and roll a lot. Those were Derkack's top 2 usages, transition and pick and roll. And I think that he can be a versatile piece in this offense, but probably not on the ball as much as he was at Merrimack.
Yeah, great points on Derkack. And I think with anything, the way Steve Pikiell's approached the portal, it's about finding the right fits to complement, stars like Dallin Harper, Ace Bailey, returning with Jeremiah Williams and the starting roles that they're going to have. Wanted to shift now to Zach Martini from Princeton, a guy that a lot of fans are excited about. Obviously was a full-time starter for a very, very good Princeton team, was a role player for the team that went to the Sweet 16, a true stretch forward that can shoot the 3. What were your initial thoughts on him coming to Rutgers?
I think it's a good fit. Rutgers has lacked the true, a true star shooter because it's not the identity that they play to have a guy that maybe isn't as strong on the defensive end, but is just going to give you buckets and shooting on the offensive end. So that's why I think it's a good fit. They just needed a guy like this. It's going to go out there, take 6 or 7 threes a game and hit 38, 39% of them. And sure, they'll give up a bunch of points when he's on the court, but you're going to be surrounding him with 4 other great defenders.
Yeah, good point. And just in terms of his, defense with Princeton. He did defend a lot of the 4 and the 5. There's some concern he's undersized in terms of being able to defend bigger players in the Big Ten. But in terms of rebounding, I was impressed with his film just in terms of his fundamentals and his ability to box out. He didn't have huge numbers with Princeton, but I think part of that was him playing on the perimeter more. Do you think he'll be able to adapt and be an effective rebounder in the Big Ten?
I mean, it depends kind of on the style that they're going to play when he's in the game. I feel like this is much more of a addition that you want to have on the perimeter. You don't really want to put Zach Martini on the inside and say, hey, figure it out, guard a Big Ten 5-man. You're going to have him mirroring smaller lineups when the other teams are on the court. And that's kind of what Rutgers is doing by adding a guy like Derkack, adding Martini. They're building in more versatility to their team because they also returned plenty of guys from plenty of guards from last year. They don't return a ton, but they return something in the backcourt, and they're trying to build up some versatility. And Martini can play 25 minutes a game, 20 minutes a game of just really good shooting, and you bring in some other guys for defense, and you have him. You can have him as probably not as a small ball 5 for more than like 2 or 3 minutes, but you can have him on the court in a lot of different situations. You can play the 3, you can play the 4. Sure, he might get beat off the dribble, but I mean, Princeton wasn't a great defensive team. That's known, but Princeton was also full of animals on its defensive glass. And Caden Pierce, Xavier Lee, Martini, Blake Peters was a really good defensive rebounder. Jack Scott was a really good defensive rebounder. I didn't think Martini was one of their best rebounders, but that just says more about the fact that, look, Xavier Lee is the best 6'3", 170-pound rebounder maybe in the country. And Caden Pierce might just straight up be pound for pound the single best rebounder in all of college basketball. I mean, he's 6'7", 220. And like Mitch Henderson, who was one of the best coaches in the country, when I covered the Ivy League tournament in Pierce's freshman year, said, this is the best rebounder I've ever coached. He coached a lot of great players. Freshman year, Caden Pierce, best rebounder he's ever coached. Caden Pierce might just be the best rebounder in the country. And working with him will certainly reflect on Martini, who, I mean, look, if Pike wouldn't take a guy if he didn't think he could do the dirty work at least a little bit. That's what we know about Steve Pikiell. The guy is a total sicko for just guys that are going to play hard. That's been Rutgers' MO since he got the job. It's pounding nails. It's you want to run other teams through a meat grinder. You don't want to beat them with scoring. And now that you finally have guys that can score, you're surrounding them with other guys that can score. But also, you're not taking these guys if you can't play defense. Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper are here not to change the mold of the team, but to add something to the team that they've never had under Steve Pikiell. And that's what Zach Martini is doing as well. That's what this roster turnover is doing. And again, I've said this on my blog in a bunch of ways, just get a center. Just get a center. Like, get a center, and we're looking at a potential top 15, 20 team.
Great stuff there. I totally agree. And one thing I like about Martini as well is his leadership, his experience, and his competitiveness. I think Derkack as well, known to be a really hard competitor. One thing I focused on early in the offseason was the need to add hoopers on this team, guys that are going to live in the gym. And I think also with both Derkack and Martini, they're both New Jersey guys that understand the importance of what this means to Rutgers in a way that some of the other guys, aren't as familiar with. And I think that that's an edge that Steve Pikiell values, and that is going to be important to this team. Any thoughts just in terms of overall being a Northeast hoops guy, what this means for, New Jersey and the opportunity that Rutgers has going into this season?
I mean, Martini and Derkack are winners. They come from winning programs. Yeah, it's huge for the Northeast because it's like Seton Hall and Rutgers trade off blows as just teams that play. They, over the last however many years, just disgustingly unattractive basketball. and I always thought that those teams had ceilings. Under like Kevin Willard's best teams, he needed Miles Powell he needed the best scorer of the decade in the Big East, aside from Marcus Howard and Miles Powell, in order to really even scratch the surface of being an elite team. I don't really even think they got there. And for Rutgers, they always had a ceiling because of the way that it always had a ceiling because of the way that it played offense just not well. And now you add outlier shot maker slash athlete slash shot creator in Ace Bailey and an outlier playmaking combo guard who can score. And Dylan Harper is a confusing player, but he's really, really good. Like, it's hard to put him in a box because I don't really think he's a point guard, but I think he's much better of a playmaker than most combo guards. I just think he's really good. And then obviously more long-term projects in terms of Somerville and Dortch. I think that the way that this offseason has gone, at least to this point, is maybe a vote of confidence for Somerville, that they haven't really gone after a big-time center. I think Rutgers has an opportunity to do something really special next year. Maybe win a Big Ten title that's probably the goal in that locker room next year. They want to go out there and win a Big Ten title. Zach Edey's gone. The Big Ten is much more open than it was last season because Terrence Shannon's gone, Zach Edey's gone, the best players in the league are gone, and now you're looking at a situation where Rutgers now might just if Ace Bailey comes in and is just straight up the best player in the Big Ten, how many people would be truly that shocked? I mean, I would be surprised, but it's on my bingo card. It's on one of my million bingo cards. There's a lot of things that are not on any of my bingo cards. That's on one of them. I can totally see Rutgers just having some of the most talented players in the country that come together and play under this identity, and it really clicks. But then again, it's really hard to win with freshmen at a really high level, especially in the Big Ten, where it's just not a league dominated by freshmen. It's played at such a physical way. And I do think that the Big Ten is certainly officiated differently than a lot of other leagues. Just in the way that the games are played, because it's so focused on certain, like, obviously the officials are the same officials that officiate other games, but I think that the Big Ten is kind of played in a different way that's conducive to different types of officiating than other leagues. I haven't really been able to explain it, but I can definitely tell. You can tell when a game is a Big Ten game, even if you stripped away the jerseys when you're watching it, and that might be a struggle for Rutgers. But as I said, like, when you get the chance to recruit a hometown hero like Dylan Harper and a guy like Ace Bailey, it's not something that is at a program like Rutgers you can afford to say, no, I'm not going to do it. There's more interest around Rutgers basketball now than I think there's ever been, and that's credit to how good Steve Pikiell is as a coach, just drumming up interest in this program. Like, if you told any Rutgers fan, and I'm sure that you've said this, you've gone on this diatribe a million times since Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper committed. If you told any Rutgers fan when Steve Pikiell became the head coach that he would be able to recruit multiple 5 stars, have one of the best recruiting classes in the country, and have expectations of being a top 15, 20 team in the preseason at any point, that's a resounding success. What Steve Pikiell has done with this program, this was a program that was consistently among the worst in high major basketball in the Big East. I always remember it was a joke. Rutgers was a joke in the Big East when I first started watching college basketball. They were in the DePaul USF levels of that Big East. And honestly, USF was probably doing a little bit better. And that's where we're at now with this Rutgers program, that they won 15 and 17 this year, but there's a better feeling around this program than there ever has been. They make the tournament 2 years ago if Moat Mogg doesn't get hurt. They were a couple points away from beating a really good Houston team that ended up making the Final Four in 2021. The 2022 game against Notre Dame was an insane basketball game, but hey, you make the NCAA tournament. You have multiple Big Ten Defensive Player of the Years on your that have come through this program. McConnell, Cliff, guys that are just really impactful. Haggerty Award winners as well. Haggerty Award winners with Harper, I believe, won it a couple years ago. A guy in Mulcahy who was really good. Cam Spencer's now a national champion. He's come through this program. Just really impactful players have come through this program. but Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey have the chance to help build something at Rutgers that has never been able to be built before, just straight up because these guys are that good. And I also think that, look, I don't want to. I feel like one guy that we haven't mentioned enough of on this podcast. I mean, Jeremiah Williams and JaMychal Davis, two guys coming back to play in this stacked backcourt. What does that say about the culture of this program that a freshman like JaMychal Davis is willing to come back and fight for a spot in this backcourt when he's probably not going to start with Jeremiah Williams in the picture and with as many guards as they're bringing in, but he's willing to come back. And obviously, Rutgers loses a lot, but I think Pikiell was planning on losing a lot because he's planning on rebuilding the way that the roster runs. And it was a bad year last year. Like, he kind of banked on maybe we can get Noah Fernandez to hit. We can get Austin Williams to hit and Griffiths to hit and Mawot Mog healthy. And really, none of Griffiths, Williams, and Fernandez hit. Jeremiah Williams was out for most of the year. Mog was out for most of the year. So it wasn't quite as – and at that point, you're really relying on Derek Simpson to hit the next level, which he never did. And I think he's going to be really good at St. Joe's next to two of my favorite guards in the country, and Xavier Brown and Eric Reynolds. I always need to make sure when I get the chance to praise Xavier Brown that I do it because that dude is going to be a superstar. But Andre Hyatt, like there was just not enough offensive firepower on this team. And I think that was obvious in the roster construction. I think that at the end of the day, the only guy that you are really losing a ton of sleep about losing from this roster was Cliff. Obviously, you want to bring Mog back if you can, but at the end of the day, Cliff is the only guy that I really find is at a level to be irreplaceable because I think he's one of the best defenders in the country, and he has been for the last 3 years now. And that's the guy that Rutgers still has to make an effort to replace. I think Mog was really impactful for what they did, but I think adding as much offensive firepower as they're adding makes the loss of Mog, who was such a terrific glue guy, a lot less of a burden. And I don't think you're losing sleep, a ton of sleep over losing Hyatt, even though good player. I think that's a guy that you can find production. You can find replaceable production for that, especially with the guys they're bringing in. Fernandez didn't live up to the expectations that maybe I had for him. I thought he was going to be a really good point guard for them, but it just didn't work out. And the backfill of the roster and guys like Palmquist and Wu Folk and Chol, no one's losing sleep about losing those guys.
Very true. And, a big part of, I think, was just having so many players come in late in the offseason with many injuries coming in. So I think that was a big part of it, as well as obviously losing Mulcahy and Spencer very late in the game. Completely different offseason so far for Rutgers, adding a lot of transfers from the portal early on in the process, now with 11 scholarship players, as you said, needing to add more, but very excited about Jordan Derkack and Zach Martini. Really appreciate all your insight on them. Sam Federman from Mid-Major Madness and the podcast Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. Anything you could tell anyone who's listening where they can find you online and on social media?
Yeah, if you guys like mid-major basketball, if you guys like college basketball, definitely check out my Twitter at Sam_Federman, Federman is how you spell my last name. It's more difficult than people think. It's more difficult than I would think for some people who spell it with 2 D's or 2 T's sometimes, but most people usually get it right. Federman. If you like the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, New Jersey basketball, New York basketball. I'm a New York guy, so I have a obvious disdain for New Jersey, but I also love New Jersey. Like New Jersey's like the brother that you hate and you love when you're a New Yorker, because I feel like it tries to be New York so hard, but then again, it is the closest thing to New York out of any other state in the country. It's densely populated. It's got a lot of good things going for it, and it's got a heck of a basketball team brewing in New Brunswick, and I actually I'm gonna try and get out there for a game next year because there's no way that I can miss the Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey show. And if all goes according to Steve Pikiell's plan, man, a Rutgers regional game in Newark would be an experience that I feel like would be unmatched. I think that that's certainly in the picture, and if that happens, man, the Sopranos memes would be off the charts.
That would be the dream. Getting to Newark in the Sweet 16. Obviously, probably need to be a 4 seed to get in the East region, at least guaranteed. Long way to go, but certainly expiring.
It's good to set goals for a program like Rutgers that are maybe not Final Four level, but the amount of talent coming into this team, you'd be remiss not to set expectations at a level where, hey, we're looking at a potential Sweet 16 team here. We're looking at a team that can do a lot of damage and make some noise in the Big Ten, get a double bye, a top 3, top 2, maybe even win the league next year because it's going to be more open. And I think that for Rutgers, it's really exciting for the Northeast because New Jersey hasn't had a truly elite team in a very, very long time. I mean, this Princeton team was one of the most exciting New Jersey teams in a long time this past year. And obviously Seton Hall and Rutgers have had teams better than that, but Princeton might have been my favorite. Princeton this year and St. Peter's in 2022, maybe my favorite ever Jersey teams to watch. And Rutgers could enter this conversation next year.
Sam Federman, really appreciate all your insight, and hopefully you do make it down to the rack for at least one game next season, and we'll touch base with you as well. And I wanted to say your coverage of the MAC tournament this last March was inspirational stuff, and really wanted to have you on. So appreciate all your time, and keep doing your thing. And for those that love college basketball, definitely check them out. And thanks so much for watching and listening to the Scarlet Faithful podcast once again.
Thank you.